Fine, so let's check this out, that how actually Selenium works. Fine, and how we can write the Selenium code. So we had seen how we can open the browser dynamically. Fine, so I'll just make a new package like day4. Fine, so how Selenium works. Once you have opened the browser the way we had seen and you have navigated to the website, okay, you would require, obviously you would want that you interact with the elements on the web page. Okay, so how do you interact with the elements on the web page? Alright, so there are different elements on the web page. So how Selenium works? Alright, look, the thing is, you just have to understand that Selenium works on the page source. This is the page source. Okay, when you right click on the element, you get the option to explore the page source. Fine. And how do you know which element is where in this page source? Okay, well, it's quite simple. If you are using Chrome, fine, you can just say, for example, this is the headline over here, entertainment. Okay, this is one of the links. You just have to right click on it and say inspect in Chrome. So Chrome Inspector will open up. Fine, and you can inspect the element over here. Just a minute. So this is the Chrome Inspector which opens up. Fine, you just have to right click on the element and say inspect. Fine, and then you will see the arrow over here. Okay, always use this view, dock to bottom, that's helpful. Fine, and you have this arrow icon. Fine, you click on this, and if you move your mouse over this, alright, you will see the code of the element, the HTML code highlighted. This HTML code over here represents this particular link. Okay, or for example, there is an image over here, the image of Nike shoes. If I move my mouse, if I click on the arrow and move my mouse over here, it will highlight the HTML code representing the image. Fine, so this way you can inspect any element in the page source. Fine, this is the HTML code of this particular link. Fine, now the thing is, in HTML you have got tags and attributes. Fine, for example, over here, whatever starts with the bracket, angular bracket, okay, is a tag. Over here, span is a tag. Alright, so anything which starts with the angular bracket is known as a tag. HTML is nothing but a simple game of tags and attributes, okay, which are like present within each other. Right, for example, over here, span is a tag, this anchor A is a tag, whatever starts with the conical bracket. This div is a tag which is opening over here, and if you map it, it closes over here. Fine, this h3 tag opens over here and closes over here. Okay, so it's nothing HTML, but it's multiple tags which are present, and they might be present one inside another, and any tag can have attributes. For example, this div tag has attributes like class and data analytics. It can have 0 attributes or any number of attributes. Okay, this h3 tag has attribute known as class as well as data analytics. This span class has the attribute class. Okay, over here this is the li tag which has got no attribute. Alright, so with the help of these tags which are nested inside one another and the attributes, we go and find the elements on the web page. Okay, so there are two things. Firstly, whatever starts with a angular bracket is a tag, and a tag can have attributes associated with each other, with itself. Okay, right. So that's how we go and identify the elements on the web page with the help of tags and attributes. If you talk about other browsers, for example, if I open Mozilla, fine, and I have to investigate some element on, say, Mozilla, fine. So how do you go and investigate on Mozilla? So you just have to right click on the element and say inspect. On Mozilla as well, you can inspect the element. The same inspector will come up. Alright, same kind of, in I also the same thing is there. Fine. Now, if I just generally categorize everything, okay, I will just go to this project, make a new Excel, fine, call it HTML elements. If I classify the HTML elements, if I try to classify them in an Excel file, hold on, then you know the element type, okay, or you can call it object type. In automation, everything on a page is technically known as an object. Okay, if you look at this, any link is an object, any button is an object. Okay, everything which is present under the page is actually just an object. Fine. So there are different types of objects, like you can have text fields, you can have radio buttons, okay, you can have normal buttons which are there on the web page, okay, you can have checkboxes, right, what else, you can have links, you can have select boxes, the drop downs basically. You can have regular text on the web page, the normal text which is there. You can have images on the web page. So these are the general objects which are present on the web page. Every object would have a particular tag associated with it and some attributes. Okay, some of the attributes are mandatory, that they will always be present with the particular object, and some of the attributes are optional. Okay, so for example, let's say text fields and all. Okay, if I go to this simple page like facebook.com, Okay, this is the login screen. On this login screen, I have the text field, I have a button as well. We have a drop down, alright, and radio button, image and all, everything is present. Fine. Now if I analyze any text field, say first name or surname, right, you will get the code of that particular text field. In case of a text field, alright, the tag name is always input. No matter which text field you analyze, you will always get the tag name as input. So out here, in case of text field, tag name is always input. And there will be an attribute known as type equals to text. This attribute would always be present in case of text field. Okay, other attributes over here like class or data type or name or value, these are optional, ID. But this class attribute would always be present with the text field. Sorry, this a type attribute. Okay, so in case of a text field, you have mandatory attribute named as type equals to text. This will always be present. In case of buttons, submit buttons and all, alright, if you analyze this, say login button, in case of a button, the tag name is always input. Just like the text fields, the tag name for a button is also input, but the type you would always find it out to be submit in HTML. We are understanding this because Selenium works on the page source, this kind of page source. Okay, so type attribute, you see this type attribute over here is submit. So in case of a button, the type attribute is always submit. Fine. And in case of radio buttons or checkboxes, fine. For example, this is a radio button. Right. In case of radio button also, the tag name is input, but the type attribute over here becomes a radio. Okay. So in case of radio button, type is radio, tag name is input. For checkbox also, the tag name is input, but the type becomes checkbox. In case of a link, fine. For example, there is a link over here, forgotten account. Fine. If I analyze this link, a link will always be having a tag name known as anchor tag A. Okay, and there would be an attribute known as href, which will point towards the URL, which will open if you click on the link. This is the target URL for the link. Fine. So in case of a link, the mandatory attribute is href and the tag name is anchor tag A. All the links on all the websites would have this anchor tag. Alright. In case of a drop down, like we have a drop down over here, if you look at this drop down, the tag name is always select. Okay, for in case of a drop down, the tag name is select, and under the select tag you have got multiple option tags. Each option tag represents the options in the particular drop down. there is no mandatory attribute in case of select tag. Okay. In case of a regular text on the website, the text which is written, for example, this text is written. Alright, you just cannot categorize it into one particular form or tag. Sometimes it is inside div tag, sometimes in para tag, sometimes span. So you just have to analyze it. There is no particular tag name for the regular text. Okay. In case of an image, like we have this image over here. Okay. The tag name is image img, and there is a mandatory attribute known as source, which points towards the URL from which the image is loading. Okay, if I copy this URL, open it over here, you see this image. This is the actual URL from which the image is coming up. It's coming up on this web page. Okay, so in case of image, the tag name is img, and there is a mandatory attribute known as source from which the image loads. Alright, now apart from this, there can be any number of optional attributes, but primarily if an element has ID, name or class, it becomes relatively easy to identify the element. Okay, ID, name or class attributes, they make it easier to identify the element, especially if an element has got ID or a name. ID or a name is supposed to be unique for the element. Alright, so this ID or name would be helpful in finding the elements on the page. So if any element has got this attribute like ID or name, it becomes really easy to identify it. Alright, for example, if I investigate this first name field, okay, then it's got a name as well, and it's got an ID as well. So it is easier to identify this element. Relatively easier as compared to the other elements which might not have any ID or name attributes. Fine. But how do we write the code? Okay, how do we write the code for this? For understanding that, you need to firstly go to the official website of Selenium and go to the documentation. Fine. Click over API docs and go to the documentation. In the documentation, you have these all classes. Fine. And over here, if you scroll down, just a minute. Yeah, you have an interface known as WebElement. So the WebElement interface is an interface which represents a generic HTML element. Okay, in Selenium, we also call objects as web elements. Okay, all these elements fall under the category of web elements. So we have an interface web element which has got functions which you can perform on these elements, like clear, click, or you want to check whether the element is displayed, it is enabled, selected. Send keys will actually use to type into the element, submit. So this has got generic functions which you can perform with any element on the web page. Okay, but how do we identify the elements on the web page? For that, we have another class known as by. This by class over here, class by, has got locator strategies. That is the strategy with which you are going to identify the elements. It's got the mechanism used to locate elements within the document. Okay, so there are different mechanisms you can identify: by ID, by link text, by name, okay, by tag name. XPaths are also there, and there are different things with which I can identify the elements. CSS selector is also there, class name. So we will look at these locator strategies one by one, starting with ID and name. We'll start off with this. Okay, so how do we write the command for identifying the elements? Look, if you go to the basic interface, which is the WebDriver interface, the WebDriver interface has got a function known as find element. It's got a function which accepts the argument of the by class, that is, by which criteria you want to identify the element, and returns you a reference of WebElement interface. Okay, so most of you must have seen this command, but technically it returns you a WebElement and it takes in the locator strategy. Okay, so let's write some code. Alright, or rather I'll copy the dynamic browser code from the previous class into today's class. Fine, and you see that. So this was the code. Over here I will write like this. Now once you are on, say, let's go to Facebook. So we are dynamically opening the browser. Right now I'm opening Chrome, and if I just run this code, then Chrome will open and it will take me to Facebook. Okay, right. Now out here, suppose I have to type something in the first name field. So I can inspect the first name field, and you will see that, just a minute, the name is first name. Okay, now the thing is, guys, at times, let me first use name and then I will tell you. Okay, name is first name, and over here I will write driver dot find element by dot. If you write by dot, you will get all the locator strategies which we can use. I will use the strategy name. Fine, and you give the name over here. Okay, driver dot find element by this particular name. So this will go and find the web element and return you the username web element. Okay, you can import it, and on the username web element or the first name, you can fire the functions which are there in the WebElement interface. For example, send keys function can be used to type something inside the text field. Okay, so when you run this code, it will go and You see that it goes and types XYZ in the text field. Okay. Right. Now, WebElement interface offers us variety of functions. For example, I write over here first name dot get location. Okay, so it will give you the location of the element. Dot x will give you the x coordinate of the element, and dot y will give you the y coordinate of the element. So coordinates are there on the web page. Okay, what happens is that the top left point on the web page. Okay, just a minute. This thing's not working. Yeah. On the web page, the top left point is having coordinates 0x, 0y. X coordinate increases over here and y coordinate increases downwards. Okay, not upwards, because this is the starting point. In case of mobile or web, anything, okay, this is the topmost coordinate. It is 0, 0. Right. So you can get the x and y coordinates of the elements as well this way, and when you run this code, this is going to print it. So on the web element, with the web element, you have lot of features and lot of functions which come up. Fine. So you see that, okay, I did not print them. Okay, I'll print them, and next time when I run it, okay, you will be able to see the output. Fine. Now the next thing is that, suppose I go and identify this text field surname. Surname text field has this ID. Okay, so you can also find the element with IDs. I can write over here WebElement surname is driver dot find element. By the ID option is also there. Okay, and I write over here surname dot send keys. Say anything like PQR, and if I run this code, you will see that okay, so out here, if you look at the output, it's typing this and it's able to type the surname as well. Okay, so with ID also you can identify the elements. But guys, you have to be little careful with Facebook. These guys at times change the IDs. Okay, for example, if I look at the first name field in this browser which I had opened up earlier, the ID is 0U0M, and in the second browser you will see that for the same first name field the ID is U_0_M, and over here also it is same, right? That is okay, but sometimes what happens is that they dynamically change the ID so that automation tools cannot actually interact with Facebook. It's a very advanced website. It's a very smart website. If you take simple websites, then the IDs and all, they won't change up like that. But how do you manage the changing IDs and all? We will see that later on. At times websites, what they do is that they change the IDs of the elements after every 2 hours or 3 hours. Very few websites, so that automation tools, they don't get into them. Alright, but still it's working over here. It's good if it's working fine, and we are also getting the X and the Y coordinates over here. Okay, now the thing is, to interact with one element over here, I am writing 2 lines of codes. Okay, so you can also write this in one line, right? Instead of writing like this, you can simply write driver.findElement by the name, first name, dot send keys XYZ. So in this one line, you can actually execute both the lines. The execution starts from the left side. First it finds the element, web element, and then it types something into it. Okay. Similarly, if you have to get the X coordinate now, you will have to again find it and again find it and get the location dot Y dot get the location dot X. Similarly, for this line, you can find it by ID and type something inside it. Okay. So if you run this, the output will still be the same. Fine, it's typing in. Okay. Now, the question which comes in the mind is that, suppose by chance if 2 elements on the page have got same name or same ID, what will happen? Right now, it's a very simple and happy scenario that each element over here has its own unique ID. What if there are 2 elements on the web page with the same ID? What if this username page and this first name text fields had the same ID? Then what Selenium would have done? Okay, look, Selenium, you understand, works on the page source. Selenium extracts the elements from the top left to the right corner and it goes down. So if there are 2 elements, okay, say this text field and this text field, both of them have the same ID, Selenium will use the first one. It will ignore the second one. How will you work with the second one? I will talk about that later on. But technically Selenium will just take the first one. Okay, so if 2 elements have the same name or same ID, in the extraction process, the first one would be automatically found by driver.findElement and second one would be ignored. Fine. And one more thing, if you don't find an element with the name, if for example, I am writing driver.findElement by the name first name. So if I just put something over here, X, so this thing would not be found. Okay, and if I run this code, so it won't find any element with this particular name on this line to get the X coordinate, and what we get is that we get exception. Okay, and the exception is no such element exception. So if you get this kind of exception, don't worry, just read it carefully. It tells you that no such element, unable to locate the element, okay, with the name, first name, okay, and it also tells you the line number that in dynamic browsers.java, line number 30, the error is coming up. If you click on it, the line is also highlighted. Alright, at times you might get different exceptions, and if you don't understand them, just copy the exception line, and you can also search on Google. Just paste this exception on the Google. You will have lots of people discussing this error. Okay, you can remove some variable component. Alright, you see that? You will see a lot of people discussing this particular error. Fine. So you have to be, careful about this. Okay. Now moving ahead, just a minute. We saw how to identify the elements with ID and name. Now at times, you also have got class attribute. I had told you about the class attribute. Okay, when you inspect some element, that element can have an attribute like class. Like for example, this division over here has a class. The class attributes are not unique. Okay, there can be multiple elements on the page which can have same class. So you have to be a little careful with this. Okay, and the last thing is you have to be careful about, the browser as well. Okay, if I am writing this script on Chrome, then if I change this to Mozilla, the question is, will this be working? If I just change the browser name, I had investigated everything on Chrome. Okay, and I want to open this on Mozilla now. Will this thing work? The answer is yes. I'll run this code. It will work because the browser can differ, but the page source will remain the same. Page source never changes. Okay, page source always remains the same. If you look at Mozilla, you will open Facebook. The browser can be different, but since the page source is same, this thing is going to work on Mozilla as well. So it prints XYZ over here. It gives you the same kind of exception. Okay, because of this line, I'll correct it. Okay, so the thing is, inside the page source, if you investigate this element on Mozilla as well, you will find that it's got the same name and same ID and all, everything. Okay, the ID is also same. So across the browsers, you don't have to worry. Alright. Since the page source remains the same, the ID remains the same, the name remains the same, all the attributes over here, it will remain the same. There are hardly any websites which open differently with different, you can say, with different browsers. Okay. Now, if you have to practice, okay, then try to log in into Facebook with your user ID and password. Just try to do that. Okay, just go to Google and try to search for something. This is quite challenging. Okay, try to search for something. It's not as easy as it looks. Okay, so you try this out today. Fine. I am ending the class a little bit earlier today because I have to move out somewhere.